Well, good morning, BG4, and happy Sunday. If you don't know me yet, my name is Elijah. I'm the youth pastor here at Battleground Foursquare Church. I'm so grateful to be here with you guys online this morning and in person. If you want to join us at Church of the Holy Spirit at 11 o'clock this morning, you for sure can. We have space for you. We have room for you. I just hope you guys are having a wonderful Sunday morning so far. It's been a weird week. It's been hot, then it's cold and rainy. But I hope your Sunday is great. I hope you are relaxed. I hope you got enough sleep, and I hope you are sipping on your favorite cup of coffee this morning, and you had a great breakfast. So I encourage you guys to sit back, relax, maybe grab your Bible and get comfortable, enjoy some worship from Stanwood Foursquare Church, and enjoy a message from Pastor Elizabeth. I'll be back in a couple of minutes with announcements and some exciting upcoming things that we have going on here at BG4. See you guys soon.
Not gonna wait for the walls to fall. I know a name that will bring them down. I've got a praise stirring within my soul. I'm not ashamed to declare it now. Light of the world, trample the darkness. Nothing can stop it. You are the God of the promise. Every word will be accomplished. Nothing can stop it. You are the God of the promise. Prepare the way, the King of Glory comes, and at His name every fear must bow. Throw off your chains, Jesus destroyed them all. Up from the grave, He is with us now. Light of the world, trample the darkness. Nothing can stop it. You are the God of the promise. Every word will be accomplished. Nothing can stop it. You are the God of your promise. The gates of hell. The gates of hell will never stand a chance. Your name prevails, Jesus the great I am. No word will fail, no weapon formed against your name prevails, Jesus the great I am. The gates of hell will never stand a chance. Your name prevails, Jesus the great I am. No word will fail, no weapon formed against your name prevails, Jesus the great I am. Light of the world, trample the darkness. Nothing can stop it. You are the God of your promise. Every word will be accomplished. Nothing can stop it. You are the God of your promise. come together, strangers, neighbors, our blood is one. Children of generations, of every nation, of kingdom come. So don't let your heart be troubled. Hold your head up high, don't fear no evil. Fix your eyes on this one truth: God is madly in love with you. So take courage, hold on, be strong. Remember where our help comes from. Whoa. Our salvation is in His blood. Jesus, light of heaven, friend forever, His kingdom come. So don't let your heart be troubled. Hold your head up high, don't fear no evil. Fix your eyes on this one truth: God is madly in love with you. So take courage, hold on, be strong. Remember where our help comes from. Whoa. Let the praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything with breath, repeat the sound. All His children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good power. His name is Jesus. And swing wide, all you heavens, let the praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything with breath, repeat the sound. All His children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. And swing wide, all you heavens, let the praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything with breath, repeat the sound. All His children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. Whoa, oh, oh, oh. Swing wide, swing wide. All you heavens, let the praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything with breath, repeat the sound. All His children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. Come on, what's His name? Say Jesus, our redemption. Our salvation is in His blood. Jesus, light of heaven, friend forever, His kingdom come.
Hi, it's good to be back with you, BG4. I have a few announcements before we get into the message. This Coming up Sunday, June 20th, we have Father's Day. We're going to have a barbecue with hot dogs and root beer. This will also be a goodbye to the Ainley and Dresser family as they move on to new chapters of their lives. The Dressers will still be here attending church, but the Ainleys will be moving to Spokane. And we just want to say thank you and send them off with love and prayer. We have a serving opportunity for you guys this morning. If you want to sign up to join our fireworks booth and serve there and work the register or hold signs or stock shelves, the sign up will be on our website at bgfour.com. We will have all the information there. You can check a time slot and just make sure you can even set it in your calendar so you don't forget what time and day you signed up to be at the fireworks booth. I will be there every day from 12 to 4 o'clock, hanging out with my youth students and helping them work for camp. One other thing, we have another giving opportunity for backpacks. This is the last week to bring in backpacks today, Sunday, and Tuesday to bring in donations, and all that information is up on the screen. But we thank you guys so much for your generosity. We appreciate you guys giving to our church. We have so many opportunities that we're able to move forward with because of your guys' faithful giving, just like Mexico, which we're going in a few weeks to build houses, just like giving away these backpacks, helping FCRC, which is a community resource center in our town of Battleground, which helps all of North County. And we're going to be able to help supply 1,500 backpacks to reach kids who can't afford backpacks or school supplies for the upcoming school year. So if you want to give, you can give online here at bgfour.com/give. All the information is going to be on the screen. You can text to give. You can set up bill pay through your bank. You can give it in person or give by mail. And again, all that information is on the screen right here. We hope that you guys are having an amazing Sunday and you had an amazing worship experience with Stanwood Foursquare Church. So I encourage you to sit and relax and be attentive to what God's going to speak to your heart this morning through Pastor Elizabeth's message, continuing our series on Nehemiah called Ruins. Thank you, guys.
When we first visited Battleground a few years ago, we wanted to know as much as we could about this community's history, its challenges, its successes, its concerns for the future. And a lot of people told us stories about a really difficult time that happened between 2011 and 13 when 7 students in the Battleground School District committed suicide. And when I was still living in Hillsboro, Oregon, that felt sad, but it felt distant from me. But then we decided to move to Battleground. And we enrolled our kids in Battleground schools. And we dropped them off on the first day. And on that day, everything changed for me. Now, Battleground's problems and Battleground's future were my problems and my future, and I cared intensely about the kids in Battleground School District. It wasn't that I hadn't cared before, but there's something about moving here, and there's something about putting your kids right in the middle of this community that makes your heart connected, so you care passionately about what happens in the future. After we moved here, we began looking around to see who was reaching kids for Jesus in Battleground. We didn't have a youth group at the time at Battleground Foursquare, and so we thought maybe we'd even send our kids to another church's youth group, but we never could find that there was the youth group in town that everybody was going to or anything like that. I even reached out to Young Life and asked about their plans for Battleground, and they tried to start 3 groups and none of that had worked, but they did give me some good advice about praying and gathering people who were committed to launching a youth ministry in Battleground. We had our friend Marcy Pialani here for a couple of years, and she did lead youth ministry, and we're so grateful to her for that. And she made the brave decision to say, I'm not the right person to lead this forward, so I'm going to step out of the way. But at the time, that felt devastating. And I think Evie and I She's my good friend, so we at least talked a lot about how much we needed a youth pastor because we have a school worth of teenagers between the two of us. And we would hit our knees and pray that God would send us a missionary to the kids in Battleground. We began to feel passionately the need for people to reach our teenagers at our schools here in Battleground. So things began to happen after we started to pray. And it wasn't just us who were praying. Some of you don't know the story about how God put it on somebody's heart in our church to give a sizable gift towards helping us hire a youth pastor that would be a missionary to our community. And then Elijah and Yessie, God spoke to them 2 states away, and they said yes to the unlikely idea of moving to a community that was totally different from where they were and getting uncomfortable and coming to reach students for Jesus here in Battleground. That was a problem that was bigger than me, a problem that I had to take to God along with several others of you that prayed with me. And I'm wondering if you ever faced a need that was bigger than you. If you faced that need that you cared so deeply about, maybe because it involved someone in your family. Maybe someone in your family faces a disease and suddenly you learn all about the needs surrounding that disease. Maybe you just have an encounter with someone that captures your attention and suddenly this problem, this need is keeping you awake at night. But it's something that you can't fix on your own. It's going to take a lot of people working together. So how do you respond when you face need? How do you say yes to God and ask Him to work in this situation that He's put on your heart? Well, we're continuing the story of Nehemiah. Nehemiah was this guy who was advancing in his career in the city of Susa. Rick talked about where Susa is. It's in Persia, close to Babylon. It was a remarkable position that Nehemiah was in when this chapter opens. He had great responsibility before the king. And you have to remember that it was just a couple generations back, maybe 3 or 4, that his family would have been prisoners of war and refugees in Babylon and then in Persia. Life was comfortable for him until he got a report that Rick talked about last week from his family that had been living in Jerusalem about how bad things were there. They were without a wall, and it's hard for us to understand how important that was in these times. This story takes place at about 445 BC, but in these times, if your city didn't have a wall, you were at the mercy of anybody who came by at night. It was like having your door unlocked. It was like not being able to sleep well or protect your family. And that's the state that Jerusalem was in. And we're going to pick up the story in the last verse of chapter 1, which is verse 11, and read through verse 7. In those days, I was the king's cupbearer. Early the following spring, in the month of Nisan, during the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, I was serving the king his wine. I had never before appeared sad in his presence. So the king asked me, "Why are you so sad? You don't look sick to me. You must be deeply troubled." Then I was terrified, but I replied, "Long live the king. How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire." And the king asked, "Well, how can I help you?" With a prayer to the God of heaven, I replied, "If it pleases the king, and if you are pleased with me, your servant, send me to Jerusalem to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried." The king, with the queen sitting beside him, asked, "How long will you be gone? When will you return?" After I told him how long I would be gone, the king agreed to my request. I also said to the king, "If it pleases the king, let me have letters addressed to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates River, instructing them to let me travel safely through their territories on my way to Judah. And please give me a letter addressed to Asaph, the manager of the king's forest, instructing him to give me timber. I will need it to make beams for the gates of the temple fortress, for the city walls, and for a house for myself." And the king granted these requests because the gracious hand of God was on me. Responding to God means answering the world's deep needs with your God-given passion and opportunities. So Nehemiah had to face the problem. First of all, he was willing to feel the sadness. In 445 BC, when this account takes place, Artaxerxes was king of the Persian Empire. He was the son of Xerxes. And it had been already 100 years since Cyrus first gave an order that Jewish refugees and people who'd resettled in Babylon and in Persia could go back to Jerusalem and begin to rebuild the temple in the city. And the temple had been rebuilt to begin with. Or the temple had been rebuilt before this point to some degree. But at this point, Nehemiah realizes how much the situation had stalled out, how much was left to do, how much hadn't been done, and how great the need was in Jerusalem. In those times, the city of your ancestors was a source of either pride and joy, or if it was in disrepair, it was a source of deep shame. And that's how Nehemiah takes it. He responds like he found out a loved one had died, with this fasting and weeping before God. Deep emotion, deep sadness and grief. And it's important to note that chapter 2 of Nehemiah takes place a full 4 months after chapter 1. Chapter 1 says it's in the month of Kislev, and chapter 2 says the month of Nisan. That's important because when we are overwhelmed with emotion about something, it can be a really prudent thing to do to process those emotions and take some time to first feel and also think about the situation before we burst into action. I need that advice sometimes. I'm a feeler. And I recently gave my daughter, who's wired a little bit like me, some advice. When you are really disappointed and you feel sad, you're grieving a loss, you got to take time to feel those feelings. And then at the end of feeling those feelings, you might be able to see new opportunities or a new story. Right now, Nehemiah is focused on the ruins when he first feels all the sadness and all the emotion. But he gives it 4 months' time. And on the other side of his grief, he begins to see that there could be a new story that God might be beginning, and God might want to use him. Recently, when I first heard that Stephen and Corey Ainley were thinking of moving to Spokane, I was just a little bit devastated to begin with. They're good friends, and they have been significant ministry partners. I wondered, what are they going to do? What are we going to do as a church? And I felt God immediately whisper to me, would I be willing to let go of the past? Because he would bring a new story and new blessing in the future. And it just so happened that the same week they finalized their plan to move, God was already speaking to Gabe Harvison about the opportunity or the calling to come and lead worship at Battleground Foursquare. And now the Ainleys are already experiencing tremendous blessing as they look forward to moving to Spokane, and we're sad but also happy for them. And it's been one more opportunity for me to trust that God works behind the scenes. But often we need to take time to process our emotion and make a plan. Nehemiah didn't ignore the needs in Jerusalem. He didn't push aside his grief and just decide not to think about it. But he also did not rush into the king's chamber in his passion and in his tears and just interrupt and say, I've got to have your attention right now. He processed the emotion and took 4 months to think and to plan. So he would have a clear presentation of the problem and the need, and he would have a clear thought on what needed to be done to respond to the problem. Some of us are really good at feeling the feelings, and some of us are really good at staying calm and planning. But it's a really powerful combination when you can be like Nehemiah and both feel the feelings that God might feel about a situation, but then also take time and make a plan about how to respond. When Nehemiah decided to speak to the king, he knew how to describe the problem and he knew what was needed to address it. Prayer prepares us for action. Nehemiah had spent 4 days at least, and then 4 months, weeping, fasting, interceding. and then planning. He was ready when his opportunity came. What's remarkable to look at is that God was already answering Nehemiah's prayer even before he prayed it. God had put him in a position of influence. In the past, he might not have known exactly why God put him there, but all of that was becoming clear. As cupbearer to the king, Nehemiah would have been kind of a sommelier for King Artaxerxes. He kept his wine, but he also tasted every cup before he gave it to the king to make sure it wasn't poison. Sounds like kind of a good job, right? On top of that, so he was trusted with the king's life. On top of that, he would have had daily FaceTime with the king, so it was a position of great influence where he would listen and speak to the king, kind of like a modern day cabinet member. Now, the book of Nehemiah only comes maybe 40 years after the book of Esther, which happened under Artaxerxes' father Xerxes. And you might remember in the book of Esther, it talks about the fact that there was a plot that Xerxes signed on to kill all the Jews in the Persian Empire. It must have been absolutely terrifying for Nehemiah's parents, maybe for him if he were alive. And so it's possible that Nehemiah would not have made known his ethnic identity. He might have thought it safer to keep it to himself. But now he has the opportunity to identify with his family that's living in Jerusalem, with the Jewish people, and to speak up for them. God's given him position and he's given him influence for this time. And he's willing to take the risk when he sees the opportunity. He has a vision of a different future. He imagined that things could be different. Nehemiah had an idea of how he could practically make a difference in the day-to-day life of God's people living in Jerusalem. He thought, I could gather resources, I could gather people and organize them to rebuild those walls and make it safe for people to resettle in Jerusalem. I don't want to wait another generation, another 100 years for this to happen. I want to take action. I want to do it now because God cares about those people, my people, who are living in Jerusalem. He did not have everything he needed to accomplish the task. There's no way he had enough money to buy the materials that were needed. He didn't have the people. He didn't know what the exact plan was. What he had was a vision and the belief that God would be with him. And I think from time to time, God drops visions in all of our hearts. Some people think about it for a moment, set it aside, and others grab onto that vision for dear life and don't let go. And I wonder about what makes the difference. I wonder if maybe some people, when God drops a vision, respond with thinking, I don't have the resources, I don't have the influence to do that. And so they set it aside. But others think, if God were with me, this would be possible. And so they are willing to grab onto a vision when they don't have the resources for it. And if we are only willing to have vision for things that we know every step of, that we have all the resources for, we're probably going to be relegated to only having vision for painting the bathroom. I mean, we might be able to gather all those supplies and be sure that we can finish the job. But if God's going to use us to do something big, address a need in the world, we're not going to have the resources we need until we start and God equips us. But Nehemiah was prepared with a clear vision. He didn't stumble around when Artaxerxes asked him why he was sad. He said, how can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins and the gates have been destroyed with fire. The state of an ancestor's burial ground was a deep concern for Persians. And so Nehemiah had one sentence to describe the problem. He didn't get into the details of the walls and all of that. He painted a graphic visual picture for King Artaxerxes about the problem that he was facing, the problem that had made him sad in the presence of the king. He was willing to get his hands dirty. I love this about Nehemiah. When Artaxerxes says, what can I do? He could have said, would you send someone to take care of this problem and send some money too? And the king probably would have done it. But what Nehemiah says was, would you send me? Would you give me a leave of absence so that I can go and I can be with my people, and their problems are my problems, and I'm willing to get my hands dirty to figure out how we can build this wall, how we can create a place of safety for men and women and children that are living in Jerusalem. It now wasn't a far-off news report for him about difficult things happening over there in that city. It was his backyard. We serve Jesus. And Jesus is the ultimate one that was willing to get his hands dirty. Nehemiah is a great picture of what Jesus did for us. He's the king, and yet he was willing to totally immerse himself in our condition, not to treat it as some far-off thing. He was willing to feel pain, to suffer our consequences, and to know what it's like to be fully human. And because of that, I think anytime we're called to Christian leadership or Christian service, it's going to look like getting our hands dirty, being willing to be part of things and feel the pain that other people feel, because we're following Jesus who did that. Then there's the bold ask. Risk. Nehemiah took significant risk to allow his grief to be visible in the presence of Artaxerxes. There was a lot of pomp and circumstances surrounding Persian kings. And one thing that was expected was that the ministers who were serving this king would leave their personal problems at the door. You didn't come in and the king didn't ask you, how are you feeling today? You were always good, you were always cheerful, and you were always ready to do anything the king asked. And so Nehemiah took this risk that could have caused Artaxerxes to just send him right out of the room, never to return. He was willing to show the emotion he felt for his people. But he'd gotten to the point, he'd crossed a line where he felt so strongly about this issue in Jerusalem that he could no longer compartmentalize his work life from this passion he had for Jerusalem. And so he took the risk of showing his emotion. And the king miraculously responded by compassionately asking him what was going on. This is an amazing moment, a God moment. But there's a backstory. It's kind of like you're watching a movie and it comes to an amazing moment and then it works backwards, showing you how you got there. Well, there's a backstory before this moment of King Artaxerxes asking Nehemiah, what's wrong and how can I help you? First of all, 4 months ago, Nehemiah was fasting and praying. And years before that, God, who saw this moment in advance, made him the cupbearer to the king. But there's an even farther back piece to this story that's fun to contemplate. Did you notice when we read this scripture that it said the king was seated with the queen beside him? Does that make you ask the question? It made me ask, why would this passage mention the queen? I read Jewish commentator Yaakov Cohen, who suggests that this queen was mentioned because it was Queen Esther. Queen Esther was married to Artaxerxes' father Xerxes and could have easily been still alive and still a queen at this point. Even if she wasn't, her story and her influence, how she identified herself as Jewish and stood up for her people, would certainly have reached Artaxerxes and influenced him. So I believe that the courage of that young woman who said, for such a time as this, God brought me here to stand up for my people, actually opened the door for Nehemiah on this day to have favor with King Artaxerxes. God begins to answer our prayers sometimes years before we even pray them. And that is so encouraging to me when I think about moving out and trusting that God's with us. The specifics: people, time, and resources. Nehemiah doesn't hesitate. He doesn't minimize his needs. I might have been tempted to kind of hedge my bets and say, I don't really need that much. But he asked a big asks. He asked for wood that would be for the gates and for the walls and even for a place for him to live. He asked for people, and he asked for permission, and he asked for significant time off. And if he wasn't bold enough to say what he actually needed, he wouldn't have been able to finish the assignment that God gave him. And so it takes sometimes becoming bold enough to ask for what we need, because we begin to be confident that God is working behind the scenes. And that's how this chapter closes. That Artaxerxes answered his request because the gracious hand of his God was upon him. The gracious hand of his God was already working in the time of Queen Esther and when he became cupbearer and when he heard the news and God began to put a plan in his heart. So how would God not continue to go before him and be with him as he answered the call he put on his heart? Responding to God means listening to the deep hunger of the world around us. Prayer reminds us that God is already at work behind the scenes. When I have prayed over a situation, then I begin to have that confidence that I'm just looking for how God's at work, that he is going before me, that when I have a moment when I could ask someone, or when I could share the gospel, or when I could invite someone to serve with me, that God may have already gone before me in that moment. And so I have courage to ask. I have courage to speak. You and I won't rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, but we can each do holy work that God gives us to do. I love this quote from Frederick Buechner about calling, because calling sometimes gets relegated to people in professional ministry, but every single person who knows Jesus has a calling that encompasses their whole life. So listen to this. The kind of work that God usually calls you to is the kind of work that you need most to do and that the world needs most to have done. If you really get a kick out of your work, you've probably met one requirement. But if your work is writing TV deodorant commercials, the chances are you've missed the second requirement. On the other hand, if your work is being a doctor in a leper colony, you've probably met one of the requirements. But if most of the time you're bored and depressed by it, the chances are that you have not only bypassed it, but probably aren't helping your patients much either. Neither the hair shirt, something really uncomfortable, or the soft birth, something totally comfortable, will do. The place that God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. I'm going to say it again. The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. What needs keep you awake at night or wake you up in the morning? What makes you pound your fist on the table because of injustice? What stirs you on the inside? All of those are clues to things that God might be inviting you to be part of his answer in the world. And with that, what gifts, what brings you joy, what has God given you? Nehemiah may not have been good at construction, but he was good at organizing people. And he knew he had a gift he could bring to this situation. Just this week, I got to hear Elijah Hamilton share with our church's leadership team about his passion, something he pounds the table over. Okay, he didn't actually pound the table, but that is about reaching Gen Z and what it's going to take for the church to reach the next generation. I'm so excited that I got to be part of praying for God to send us that missionary. I also think of Melody Miller. She experienced some really difficult things when her father died, and it brought to her attention the need for end-of-life planning, and she is passionate about her work to help people plan for end of life and finish their lives well through her ministry, Heritage of Hope. The place where the world's deep hunger and your gladness collide, that's the place that God is calling you to. It's true for us as a church as well. Just last week, we presented a need, a deep need for school supplies. And you guys answered so enthusiastically and generously. And you can still answer, you can still give. And that your joy in giving is answering the hunger in our community. And so you get to be the hands and feet of Jesus. And so I'd love to pray for you today. God, I thank you for everyone who's listening, that you have work for them to do. I pray you'd help them to discern where the world's deepest hunger and their deep gladness meet. I pray that you would help them to be willing to feel the pain, to take the risk to ask, and to be clear about the vision they see. Thank you for the work you're doing in our church and in our community. In Jesus' name, amen.